My name is Ahmad Sahar, and I am a trainer, presenter, and consultant. So for today, we're going to talk about Flutter application development. So there will be 4 parts to my presentation. One, we're going to talk about Flutter in general. Then we're going to talk about the Dart language, which is the foundation for the programming part of Flutter. Next, we're going to talk about widgets, and widgets are fundamental to building the Flutter user interface. Finally, the big event that I'm sure all of you will be interested, how to build an app from scratch, just using the things which I covered today. Now, if you have any questions, please feel free to type into the Q&A box, and then I will try to respond to them. I won't be able to respond to them when I'm talking, but I will check in from time to time. And then I will look at them as I am able to. So question number 1 for the audience participation question number 1. How many of you are already iOS developers, and how many of you are already Android developers? Okay, and if you're not a developer of any sort, then it's okay. You can type that in as well. So just type that into the chat box. We're going to take a look at the results in a little while. Okay. So first of all, why Flutter? Because if you look at my introduction, you can see that I have mostly been conducting iOS development courses. Well, the very simple answer is that if any of you have LinkedIn, all right, just go to your LinkedIn and then do a search for Flutter developer worldwide in jobs. Look at the number of hits that come back. So as you can see on my screen, almost 1 million hits, okay? So that means Flutter is like super hot right now. If you were to do the same thing and search for Android developer, you come up to be about 200, 200,000, 250,000 hits. If you search for iOS, you also come up to be about 200, 200,000 hits. For Flutter, it is over 1 million hits. And some of these jobs, okay, some of these jobs are remote. That means you can stay here in Malaysia, enjoy your teh tarik, enjoy your nasi kandar, enjoy your chichong fan, enjoy your prata, your roti canai, and you're still working with a company overseas. So that's a really cool thing. Right, so let's look at the main Flutter web page, all right? Now, for those of you who have got internet browsers running at the same time, because everybody's multitasking these days, okay, you can just go to https://flutter.dev. https://flutter.dev. Or if you're like me and lazy, just type Flutter into the search box, and then it will be the first link. So here it says build apps for any screen. And that is the main selling point for Flutter. You can build iOS apps. You can build Android apps. You can build Mac apps. Very recently, as of Flutter 2.10, you can build Windows apps, and you can also build web apps. So literally, you can build apps for any screen. So to get started, you click on the Get Started button. So what that does is it takes you into the installation page. Now, it says here, select the operating system on which you are installing Flutter. Now, a small caveat here. If you have a Windows computer and you install Flutter on Windows computer, then you can build Android apps, you can build Windows apps, you can build web apps. But even though the Flutter app that you build can actually be used to create a Mac app and an iOS app, Xcode, which is required, won't run on Windows. So if you really wanted a platform that you can build everything, then I suggest you look for a Mac OS computer. Because a Mac OS computer, you can install Windows on it. Sorry, you can install Android Studio on it, and you can install Xcode on it. Xcode will be used to generate the iOS and Mac OS apps, and then the Android will be used to generate Android apps. Okay, so that is really something you might want to consider. If you are a fan of open source, you can try Linux, and you can also use Chrome OS. Now, how does this work? Maybe it seems to be a little confusing. Don't worry, everything will be shared with you. Okay? The important thing that you want to know right now is that for about 80–90% of the apps out there, the source code that you will write in Flutter will be identical. It will be the same. And then when it comes to targeting the platforms, you will use each individual platform's native environment. Like for Android, you will use Android Studio. And for iOS, you will use Xcode to generate the binaries that can be uploaded onto the App Store or onto the Play Store. And then from there, you can then download onto your respective devices. Okay, so the next thing that you do after you install Flutter, this is a binary that you install on your computer. It has all the frameworks that you need. And the next thing that you want to do is you want to be able to edit the source code. And for this, you need an editor. There are many editors you can use. My personal favorite is Visual Studio Code because Visual Studio Code is available for Mac, it's available for Windows. It is very fast, it is very lightweight. Okay, so for me, I like to use VS Code. Now, on the next screen that you see here, this is a terminal. In order for you to check your Flutter installation, a very useful command is Flutter Doctor. So here you can see I have run Flutter Doctor, and in Flutter Doctor you can see I am using the latest version of Flutter, which is 2.10.4 on Mac OS 12.3. That is the latest version of Mac OS. And then you can see as well, I have got Xcode installed and I have got Chrome installed. Chrome is what you're going to use for web apps. I haven't installed Android Studio, but that's okay. If you've installed Android Studio, you can do that. Not a problem because I don't need it for this particular presentation. Because what I'm going to do in this particular presentation is just to show you, to get started, all you need is a computer with Chrome on it. But this is just to show you, if you're going to install something for real, and you want to put apps onto the App Store and the Play Store, you will need to install the full tool chain. Okay, then we also have VS Code, which is 1.65, and then we have one connected device. Okay, so you can actually install onto a simulator, an emulator, or an actual physical device. All right, so if you see this is good because it tells you that you can build and run on iOS. But in order to make it work on my Mac, I still have to install Android Studio. Now, I'm not going to do that right now because for this class, we're just going to use the web. But this is just something that you have to be aware of. Now, in the next slide, you will see on the left is VS Code. What you're seeing right now is VS Code. Now, I want you to look to see this is the basic Flutter project that is created when you create a new Flutter application. It gives you a full project, and it has a simple app. The app is now running on an iOS simulator on the right side of the screen. It's a very simple app. You tap on the plus button here, and then you can see the counter will increment. Of interest is when the app is created, look at all the folders that are created as well. So you can see here, Flutter application 1, this is my app. You see here Android. These are all the binaries that you need for an Android executable file. This is either an APK file or an AAB file. Then you have got iOS. These are all the files that is required for Xcode. You will then open this in Xcode and use Xcode to create the project, which you will then upload to the App Store. Main.dot is the entire file that you're looking at here on the screen right now. And main.dot contains the code to generate what you see on the screen right now. So the first app that you create will just have this initial code. You're not limited to a single file. In order for you to effectively code, you can actually segregate and abstract out functionality into different files, and then you can do imports in order to keep everything nice and organized. You can also create folders, and you can keep files in folders as well, just like any other standard IDE. Here is the web. That means this is what you need if you are going to create a web app. And finally, as of Flutter 2.10, we have a Windows directory. This is what you need to create Windows apps. Okay, so if you were to have this, like as you saw earlier in my environment, I've just got Xcode installed. Xcode gives me the simulator. When I click on when I build and run my project, it's going to use the Xcode tools to build the project and then run it on the iOS simulator. And you can figure out what's going on by looking at the debug console. All right. You've also got a whole bunch of tools, .dev tools, that you can use as well. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. Now, one of the challenges when you're learning something new is where do you get the references? Here, it is very, very easy because everything is laid out for you. You can see first step is install. Second step is set up an editor. Third step is test drive. Number 4, write your first app. So you can either use the video on YouTube or you can go through the step-by-step instructions to write your first app. If you have done mobile application development before, either Android or iOS, I think a lot of the stuff you'll find is quite familiar. Let's go on to the next slide. So after you have written your first app and you want to know the specifics, you can click on the Learn More tab. And then you can see there is a whole bunch of resources that you can use in order to build the app. Okay. Now, one of the resources is the language samples. So we are using a language called Dart. If you have used Kotlin before or you have used Swift before, a lot of this will be very familiar. Okay. And then the other thing that you will need to get to grips with is how Flutter draws its user interface. So for this, you can go to the Code Labs section of the Flutter website. And in Flutter Code Labs, you look at basic Flutter layout concepts. And this is what will give you an introduction into how Flutter does its user interface. Okay? All right. Now, I'm about ready to go into the next part, which is the Dart language. Maybe some of you are interested. I've been doing iOS all my life. And how do I feel about the Flutter environment? What I personally find is that coming from iOS background, a lot of the concepts that you see in Flutter development, they are kind of like analogous to what you already have in iOS. For instance, in Flutter, you have run app. In iOS, the UI application main. Okay. In Flutter, you have a stateless and stateful widgets. In iOS, that can be like the views that you interact with. Okay, other Flutter files, they can act a similar function to the view controllers that you have. You can have something similar, very similar to the model objects that you already have in iOS development. So even though it's not exactly model view controller, it is actually something that is very familiar for me from an iOS developer perspective. Now, as I mentioned, and you can see in your invitation, you don't have to install all that stuff in order to get started with Flutter, because all you need is a computer running Chrome. So what you see on my screen right now is a computer running Chrome. And then here you can see the link, dartpad.dev/null-safety-true. So what's Dartpad? Dartpad is basically what you'd call a REPL. Okay, it allows you to type in Dart code and also Flutter code on the left side of the screen, and on the right side of the screen, it will show the results. And you can see here there's a link to samples. So what samples has is some sample Dart code and some sample Flutter apps, which you can then execute right in your browser. As traditional, the first thing that you do is the Hello World application. So you can see very similar to C, for instance. You have got a main function. Even the Flutter app has a main function. So this main function, its job is to run the rest of the app. Okay, so here you use a print command. Again, this is something that should be very familiar to you. The print command prints items to the console. So you say here, print hello world. You can see here, this is like where you can see a small difference. Swift, you tend to use double quotes. Dart, you use single quotes. And you have a semicolon at the end of every line. So when I click on the run button, it says there, hello world. Okay. Now let's go on to the next part. So the next part I'm going to talk about is variables. All right. So you can see here in Flutter, I have got a few variables on the screen, such as name, This is my name, Ahmad Sahar. And you can see here, I can just assign a string and I don't have to specify the type. So if I assign a string to name, name will be of type string. So the next one is an integer. I assign 53 to age, and then that makes it an integer variable. Then for height, I assign 1.8. That makes it a float, or sometimes known as a double. And then here we have got a list. Sometimes it's also known as an array. So in an array, all items start with index 0. So item at index 0 is my V, and item at index 1 is matrix. And finally, you have got a dictionary. So for a dictionary, you're dealing with a collection of key value pairs. So here the key will be a string, and the value is also a string. So typically, you use that for things like contacts in your address book. So here I've got 2 names and I have got 2 phone numbers. Now, if I were to run this, okay, if I were to run this, nothing will happen. Okay, how do I make all this stuff appear in the console? What command do I use to make all this appear on the screen in the console? So if any of you have typed in the word print, you are right. Okay, so you can see here, all I need to do is just print, and then I can generate everything that you see in the console right now. Now, the next thing that we're going to look at are your conditionals. So conditionals here, we are dealing with if statements. So just like any other language, you have your if statement, and here you have your conditions. So here you are checking to see if age is over 65. Then if this is true, you will print time to retire. If it's false, you will go into the else case. Now in the else case, I have a second if statement, and the second if statement has a second condition. So remember earlier that the age was 53. So now you can see it prints can still work. So again, if you know Kotlin, if you know Swift, should be nothing new. Now, the next thing we want to look at are loops. You can iterate through all the members of a collection using this construct for var car in cars. So this can actually be any name, but I put car because my original variable has got an array of cars. And then I say for var car in cars, it will iterate through this entire array. Car will be initially assigned the value of my V, and then after that, car will be assigned the value of matrix. This is really super handy to iterate through an array because you don't have to worry about how many items in there. It will just iterate automatically through all the items in the array. If you want like a conventional for loop that you may be familiar with coming from C background, that is still here. For instance, for int month equals 1, month is less than 12, month plus plus. That means it's going to iterate from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And then it will print month each time. Now, the last one is a while loop. While will execute as long as the condition holds true. Age initially is 53. As long as it's less than 65, you will add 1 to age, print, and print the age. So 53 plus 1 is 54, then it prints 54. And then that continues until the condition is reached. So you can see here, again, nothing very new. If you're familiar with Swift, you're familiar with Kotlin, this should be really easy for you. Okay, let's move on to the next thing. Now, what we have here is a function. Okay, so again, nothing very new here. What you need for this function is you need to know what the function will return. In this case, it will return an integer. Here we have the name of the function, which is power of 2. And here we have the parameters. So it takes in a single integer. Now, you already promised to return an integer. So the return statement says return n times n. Now, to use a function, use the var results equals power of 2, 9. So you pass 9 into here. So then you will return 9 multiplied by 9, which is 81. So when I do print result, you get 81. Okay, so really simple. All right, you can also have some interesting constructs. Let's say, for instance, if you have a function that has just one statement, you can use the equals greater than to return whatever it is that you want returned. So let's say, for instance, cars. Cars is a list. Now, in the list, there is a method called where. Okay, this is something that not you create, is just part of the language. So you're searching for where, name, we'll pass him a name. Name contains VI. All right. So the only car that has got VI in the name is my V. So you can see the result of this single statement is my V. And then you can apply a for each. And for each will then, you can determine what you want to do. So here in this case, you're going to print my V. So this can be a very powerful tool to use, but if you're just starting out, you can stick with the conventional way of declaring functions because it's easier to understand. All right, so now that we've looked at functions, okay, we're going to look at classes. Classes are basically how you represent objects inside your program. Let's go back to the very first part here. Okay, now here, these are all variables. Okay, you got name, you got age, you got height, and so on. Let's say, for instance, I'm a Grab driver, or let's say, for instance, I'm a Grab driver. So you can imagine that, say, for instance, if you sign up as a Grab driver, there is a way for you to represent a Grab driver inside the app or inside the organization. So for every Grab driver, Grab itself, the company, they need to know like some details about the people who are driving for them. Let's say, for instance, just for example, maybe the name, the age, the height, and so on. And they'll also know which are the cars that they will be using, okay, because Grab has very certain conditions on the types of cars that you can use. All right. So here you can see the information is just scattered into individual variables. All right. So it becomes very unwieldy. So to collect all of this information, we can actually create a new class called Grab Driver class, and then use all these variables inside the class. So to create a class, all right, here you can see I have got an example, which is something that all of us should be more familiar with, which is the Touch and Go card. Now, pick out the Touch and Go card in your wallet or inside your dashboard or whatever it is, or just try to imagine the Touch and Go card in your mind. All right, what do you think it should have? Well, for me, I think it should have a serial number so that you can distinguish one Touch and Go card from another. Then you will need to have a value. I'm being lazy here and just putting an integer as the value. And then after that, you will need the card issue date because typically the card will last for like 10 years or maybe 20 years. I can't remember which, but after that time, it will expire. All right. Now, the next line that you see here is a constructor. If you want to create an instance of a Touch and Go card, you will use this constructor. So you can see from here, I just need to pass in a card serial number, a card value, and a card issue date, all right, to create an instance of a Touch and Go card. Now, if you have a variable inside a class, we refer to those as properties, okay? So in this case, card serial number, card value, and card issue date are instance properties. Every instance of this card has got these properties, and they will have different values. Now, you can also have functions inside a class. If a function is associated with a class, it's called a method. And we have got two methods here, describe and top up. So this describe method will print out the details of the Touch and Go card, and the top up method will then allow you to add value. Like you go to the, for instance, the Touch and Go kiosk, you put in 10 ringgit or 50 ringgit, it will increase the Touch and Go card's value. So once you have this class, right, let's see how you're going to use this class to create an instance. So here I choose var my card equals Touch and Go card A1234. All right. And then what you can see here, I'm adding a value of 50 and then date time now. That means as I issue the card, I am putting today's date on the card that is being issued. And then when I run the method describe, I get Touch and Go card serial number A1234, value 50, issue date, this date. Okay, super handy. All right. And then after that, we have got my card top up 50. So what that does is that it adds 50 to the card value, and then the result is 100, which is then printed to the console. So that is a very brief introduction to the Dart language. All right. is there any offline Dart editor? So for this, I'm just going to jump back to the earlier slide. So you can see if you go to the Flutter website, you can use three editors. You can use Android Studio and IntelliJ. You can use Visual Studio Code, and you can use Emacs. So if that is what you mean by offline Dart editor, these are the items that you can use to edit Dart code. Personally, I like VS Code. It's very fast, it's very lightweight. You just have to install the Flutter and Dart plugins here in order for it to work. Yeah, it's called Visual Studio Code. So the link for Visual Studio Code is https://code.visualstudio.com. Note that you can't use it straight off the bat. You need to install the Flutter and Dart plugins, but those are free anyway. Is Flutter a framework or SDK? Let me try to explain to you how it actually works. All right. So let's say, for instance, you want to create an app, iOS app or Android app. All right. So here are the steps that you need to do. First of all, you install Flutter. In all the Flutter code is basically things that you require to get binaries. Okay. They have got ways for you to get the binaries in Android and ways for you to get the binaries in iOS. So then to edit the code, and the code will be exactly like what you are seeing on the screen right now, this .pad code, you use VS Code. Let's say, for instance, I have got Xcode installed on my Mac, Android Studio installed on my Mac, and I have created a Flutter project. I edit all the code in my Flutter project, and then when I run, I can either test it on Android emulator or Android actual device, and I can also test it in iOS simulator or iOS actual device. Now, when it comes for me to generate the AAB file that goes up to the App Store, the Play Store, then I will choose in Flutter to build for Android. What that does is that it will use the Android SDK command line tools to build the AAB file or the APK file, and that will generate a binary, something.aab or something.apk, and that is the one that you will actually upload to the Google Play Store. So that is the way it works. For iOS, when you choose to build for iOS device, it will use the Xcode command line tools to generate the .ipa file. And this .ipa file will be the one you are going to upload into the Apple App Store. Okay? So hopefully that is clarifying a little bit about what Flutter exactly is. All right? You want to use Python in Flutter? I'm not really so sure about that, quite honestly, because the language that is used is Dart, okay? All Flutter apps will use Dart, all right? But what I can say is that if you know Python, all right, it's already a text-based language. It already supports things like conditionals, loops, and so on. And then it can also be used in object-oriented fashion. So if you know Python, it is actually a stepping stone for you to learn Dart. All right. As long as you know at least one high-level text-based language, should not be too difficult for you to learn another one and use it. I'm sorry you cannot type Python code directly to create a Flutter app. As far as I know, you need to use Dart. But if you know Python, it should be easier for you to understand Dart. Is Mac Pro 13 already good enough to dev mobile apps? So to be honest with you, I am using right now to create all my Flutter apps, I'm using a 2015 MacBook Pro 13-inch. This is like a 7-year-old machine. I can still install the latest Mac OS on it. I can still install the latest Flutter on it. It should be fine. The only thing which I suggest you do is try to put in at least 8 GB of RAM. If you are using Windows, try to have at least 16 GB of RAM. And then try to use SSD, because you'll find that this actually improves the speed quite a bit. And the next step is actually to share with you a little bit about Flutter layout concepts. Now, if you are familiar with iOS, maybe you are familiar with what is called storyboards, where you can just drag and drop user interface elements onto the screen. In Android Studio, I believe you can do something similar. But Flutter is declarative. Everything is using code. All right. It's like you're trying to explain to somebody who has never seen a house before using just words, like you're trying to explain over the phone. Like you draw a square, and then on top of the square, you draw a triangle. Inside the square, you draw two smaller squares. The one in the middle is the square reaching down to the bottom part. That's the way it works, you know. You have to try and describe everything using text. So rather than telling you, I will just showing you. If you look at your screen right now, I'm going to pass in a link as well, which this one is the Flutter layout basics. All the code is on a web browser. And then when you go to this page, you can try out code samples inline in the browser itself, which is really super handy. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is the concept of row and column. So when you want to have a bunch of objects on the screen, you can either lay them out horizontally or vertically. So if you want to lay them out vertically, you use a column. If you want to lay them out horizontally, you use a row. So you can see here, don't worry about the class myWidget, blah, blah, blah. Just look here, you return row. This is a row. And then in this row, I have got blue box 1, blue box 2, and blue box 3. Now, the next thing I want to show you is, if I were to change row to column, you can see now it is vertically oriented. Okay, now it is going from top to bottom instead of left to right. Now, if you have a row or if you have a column, you can actually change the axis size. If you have main axis size set to max, this is the default configuration. So you don't actually have to be specifying it. But you can also set main axis size set to min. So when you set main axis size to min, the size of the row or the size of the column will only be large enough to encapsulate the things inside it. You see the difference between main axis size max and main axis size min. Okay, you can see here there's quite a bit of difference. All right, now the next thing that I'm going to show you is the alignment of the objects inside a row and a column. This is dependent to the main axis alignment. You can choose main axis alignment dot start, and then that will put it in the beginning of the row or the column. And if you change the main axis alignment dot start to main axis alignment dot end, that puts it to the end of the row or the column. Now, for every row and every column, you have a main axis. Like right now, we are using a row. The main axis is horizontal, but there is also a cross axis, which is vertical. So you can see here, if I set the main axis alignment to space around, it gives you the space between the different objects inside the row. And if I set cross axis alignment to center, it will center the vertical dimension of the three objects according to their centers. All right. Now, let's say, for instance, what happens if I change cross-axis alignment dot center to cross-axis alignment dot start? Now you can see it will then align according to their starting points. Now, the next thing that we're going to look at is a flexible widget. Now, a flexible widget, all right, it lays out, it wraps a widget so that the widget becomes resizable. And when the flexible widget wraps a widget, the widget becomes the flexible widget's child and is considered flexible. So instead of using 3 regular blue boxes here, I am wrapping the second blue box and the third blue box in flexible widgets. Now, the first property that you can change is FlexFit loose, okay? Now, when you set it to FlexFit loose, all right, it will then use the widget's preferred size. But if you change FlexFit loose to FlexFit tight, the widget will be forced to fill all the extra space in the row. So you can see the difference. If I set to FlexFit loose, it maintains its original dimension. If I change it to FlexFit tight, it will take up all the space inside the row. Now, if we look at the next here, I set both of the fit FlexFit tight, but the flex properties is set to 1. So that means the same amount of space is allocated to both the second and the third blue boxes. And if I change the flex property to 2 for the second blue box, you can see this takes up twice as much space as the third box. Okay, you can imagine like the total flex property is 3. So 2 parts is given here, and one part is given here. Now, the next thing that we're going to explore is an expanded widget. So here I have got my 3 blue boxes back again. If I were to wrap the middle blue box in an expanded widget, you can see here, it will then stretch the widget to take up all the available space. Now here, you can see there is a fun thing that you can do with the format button. Here you can see I have put a comma here. So what that comma does is that it formats my code. If I click on the word format, you can see it will format the code in this way. This is really super handy. Next, we're going to look at size box. All right. Now, a size box, all right, you can use that to influence the size of a widget. So here, I set the size box to 100, and the child is blue box. The size of the child, blue box, is then stretched out to 100 points. I can also use the height property. So you can see both width and height are changed, and then the blue box will then take on the properties of the size box that you have specified. And you can also use a size box as a spacer. If it doesn't wrap any other widget, you can just use it as it is. And then you can see there is a space between the first and the second blue boxes. So that's a size box. Now we also have spacers. So you can see here, similar to a size box, a spacer can also create space between widgets. And the difference is that spacers, you can use a flex property. Size box, you have to specify the size. Here I have put the 2 spacers, and both of them have a flex property of 1. So the amount of space allocated is the same for both spacers. All right, all the widgets that you have seen so far are widgets used to position objects on screen. Let's look at widgets now that are used to display stuff, okay? So in order to display text, you have got the text widget. You can have complete control over the text color and the font size and the font style. And here you can see I have changed the text baseline to text baseline alphabetic. So all the text is now aligned according to their baselines. Next, we look at icons. There's a huge icon collection in Flutter that you can use. Here we have got the widgets icon. So that's what it looks like. Again, you have full control over the size of the widget, the color of the widget. If you want to add another one, all I need to do is you add in another icon and so on. Now, the next thing we're going to show you is an image widget. Now, all you need is to provide a URL. So when you provide a URL in an image widget, this is what it looks like. And you can change it to anything that you can find online. So now at this point, you already know an introduction to Flutter. You already know a little bit about the Dart language. You already know how Flutter lays out the user interface using widgets. And now we are actually going to start building the BMI app. All right, BMI is body mass indicator. It is a very simple app. And then I'm sure when you look at it, you can see that you can use this to build many different kinds of simple apps. Blue box is a default widget or custom defined. It's a custom defined widget. If you were to go into the link that I gave you earlier, which is docs.flutter.dev/codelab/layout basics, and then you scroll a little bit the code, you can see the definition for the blue box. It's actually a container widget with a background set to blue build, the BMI app. Now, all you need for this is Dartpad. If you've already installed all the Flutter stuff, great. But if you haven't, all you need to do is you go to Chrome, and then in Chrome, you go to dartpad.dev, all right? And then you can just follow along as I show these slides, right? So the first thing that you're going to see here is that if you go to Dartpad, and then you click on samples, one of the samples will be the counter app. And you can see this is identical to the example I was showing you earlier in VS Code. The entire source code is also identical. This stuff that you see here is actually the same thing that was in VS Code earlier. And then when you click on this, and then you click on the plus button, the counter will increment. This is your standard Flutter app. This is the standard starting point. All right, now what you do here, okay, is let's remove all the code until it looks like this. Okay, remove all the code. So inside here, you can see you're left with a single statement function main. So this single statement function main returns run app, my app. So what is my app? My app is the instance of a mobile Flutter application. There's a red line under there is because you don't know what it is. Now, before that, you can see at line number 5, import package Flutter material ... So material will have all the things that you need to build a Flutter app. It will have all the widgets, it will have all the constructs, it will have all the operations. It is basically all a kit, all right, that you use to make the Flutter app. So you can see here, I use material ... What this does is that it produces apps which are consistent with Google's material design. If you're going to produce apps which are consistent with Apple's look and feel, then instead of using material ... you will use Cupertino ... And this is well explained and documented on Flutter's webpage. Right. So since you don't know what my app is, I also don't know what my app is. The app also doesn't know what my app is. Let's go ahead and talk about what my app is. Okay. So you can see here, what I'm going here is I am creating an instance of a stateless widget. There are two kinds of widgets that you use in Flutter, which is called the stateless widget and the stateful widget. The difference is that a stateless widget, once created, it doesn't change, okay? The contents of it doesn't change. It's kind of like a CD. Once you burn a CD, then everything on that CD is immutable. If you want to make changes, you have to throw away the widget and you have to create a new one. So in this case here, when we create a stateless widget, the important thing to do is to modify the build method. The build method is somewhat analogous to draw in iOS. That is what the widget uses to create what it looks like on screen. So in this case, it says here, return material app, okay? And in the material app, the title is BMI calculator. Now this title is not going to appear on the screen. It's going to be used when you are, there are some things it's used for, but it's not going to appear on the screen. And then here is home. Home is the first screen presented to the user. So here I have set home to be home page. What is home page? You don't know yet. You haven't created it yet. So let's go ahead and create home page. Now home page is different from the earlier widget, okay? Because it is a stateful widget, okay? Remember, this is a stateless widget. My app is a stateless widget. And home page is a stateful widget. The reason is because homepage will have things in it that change, okay? You need to be able to input data. You need to be able to display the BMI. So all these properties need to be able to change. So that is why we are using a stateful widget instead of a stateless widget. Now over here, you can see you are creating an instance of a homepage state class. You will notice that there's an underscore there. The underscore means it's private. It cannot be accessed outside the widget. And this homepage state class will then hold the model objects that will be used to display the information on the widget. So here you can see right now, I'm just creating an empty container, which is background color is set to white. So that is why when you click on run, you can see you have got a white background. Now this is very boring. We need to be able to do more stuff than this. So let us update the homepage state widget. And to do that, I am going to put in all this stuff here. Now, this is basically, you don't actually need all of this. This is just basically to share with you the different things that you can put in. For instance, if you want like a standard app interface with a navigation bar at the top of the screen, all right, and a body for you to display the content, that is an instance of scaffold. So I'm using an instance of scaffold here, and I'm setting the background color to deep orange. Then we have a center widget to make sure that regardless of the size of the device, the user interface is always centered. Then I set the container as the child of the center widget. And the width of the container is fixed to 320 points. Then we have another construct called card. Now card will allow you to have like a panel in the middle of the screen. And I've set the color to white. And you can see elevation is 10. That means it is elevated slightly, and you will see like a shadow. It is not so obvious in the web, but if you were to run it on a device, then you'll see it quite clearly. Then you don't want everything to be at the edges of the screen because it will look ugly and be very hard to type on. So you add some padding, 20 points along all sides. Then in here, you will have a column. And in this column, at the moment, you are not putting in any children, okay? So at this point in time, you should just see an orange container with a white box in the middle. Now let's go ahead and add in a couple of text fields. So to add a text field, I put here a text field widget, and then here I can choose the keyboard type. Since for the height, I just need to be able to type in numbers, I will use the keyboard type number with options, and then decimal is set to true. Okay, and then the decoration, it will be using input decoration label text height in meters. So that's where this height n comes from, and this line is the text box. So this is the first text field. If I want to put in a second text field, you copy and paste the first text field, and you make some changes to it. So you can see here, this is the first text field. And then here, text input type, number with options, decimal true, decoration, input decoration, label text, weight, kilogram. So now you have got two text fields, one to give the height and one to give the weight. So all this is required to calculate the BMI. You give your height, you give your weight, it will then calculate the BMI. But I want to have a few other text objects and a few other objects on the screen. So I keep on adding objects. So here I'm going to add an elevated button. So the idea behind this elevated button is that given the height and the weight, you click on calculate, it will then display your BMI. Now at the moment, onPress method is set to null. It doesn't do anything. That is why it's grayed out. And the child property is basically the child, a text object, which is basically the text that is being displayed in the button here. Next, we are going to put in a size box. And this size box is just basically to give it some space between the button and this text here. Now this text here is going to show you your BMI because that's the focal point of the app. We want to make it a little bit larger so that it's easy to see. So here I can create a new text object, and here I can set the font size to 50 to make it pop. Now below this, I am going to put in another size box and a little line which is basically going to display a status message. Like for instance, if you type in wrong information for height and weight, it will basically tell you to correct. All right, so this is the complete user interface. It's got two text fields, it's got a button, and it's going to show the result on the label on the screen. Okay, next, what we're going to do is we're going to add some properties. All right, in order to process the text that is being typed into the text field, you will be using an object called text editing controller. You will need a text editing controller for the height text field, and you will need a text editing controller for the weight text field. Now, the result of it will be the BMI, and I have a double for BMI. Note that all of these have a underscore in front, which means they're all private variables. And finally, this message here, please enter your height and weight. This is going to be a string, okay, string property. Now here you have a method called calculate. We haven't actually done anything yet. It's just an empty method. And then what we are going to do is we are going to assign the text field controllers to the text fields. So you can see here, you've set the controller property of the height to the height controller. And then for the weight text field, you've set the property to weight controller. Then for the elevated button, instead of null, you're using the calculate method. And as a result, it now becomes blue and is highlighted. You can click it now because there is a method. Okay, and then finally, you're going to set the text for this large text over here. Now here, we are using what is called a ternary operator. So a ternary operator means, based on the value of BMI, if there is no value, you're going to show no result. If there is a value, you're going to change it to a string with 2 decimal points and display that here. So initially, it will have no value. That is why it says no result. Okay, and finally, for down here, you are going to put in the contents of the string message. So the next part that you're going to do is you're going to modify the calculate method. So the calculate method, you need to get what people have typed in into the height and the width fields. Okay, so to do that, you will use these commands. Double try parse height controller value.text. Okay, so you go to your height controller, you see what somebody has typed in here, okay, and try to parse that into a number. Specifically, it is a number, floating point number. So you try and see whether this person has typed in a valid number. The same thing with the weight, okay? Now, the next thing that you want to check that people have typed in something, and you want to make sure that it makes sense. So height, is it equal to null? Has somebody actually typed in something here? Is height less than or equal to 0? Did somebody try to be smart and put in -3 meters as the height? For weight, same thing. Check to see whether somebody has typed in the weight, and check to see whether somebody typed in the weight to be a negative number. If any of these are true, okay, that means there are no values or the values are negative, message will be assigned to your height and weight must be positive numbers. Now, how do you get the user interface to change? We have the command here, set state. So set state basically it causes any stateful widget to redraw. If the state has been changed, then the widget will redraw. And that will actually force it to display any changes that you have made. So here, I didn't type in anything. I click on calculate, and then your height and weight must be positive numbers. All right. Now the next part, okay, we are going to actually calculate the BMI itself. So once again, you can see here, I'm using set state. Now we calculate the BMI by taking the value for weight and then dividing it by height multiplied by itself. Okay, height squared, weight divided by height squared. And that will give you the BMI. And then the next thing that you have is an if statement. Okay, so the if statement, it checks to see if your BMI is less than 18.5, okay, then the message will be set to you are underweight. So down here, it will be you are underweight. And then else if underscore BMI less than 25, message you are fine, okay. Else if BMI under 30, so message you are overweight. So as you can see here, I am overweight, sorry to say, okay. And then finally, it says message you are obese. So you can see here, by just using a few lines of code, you have a perfectly functional BMI calculator that will run on the web, that will run on Android, that will run on iOS, that will run as a Mac app, that will run as a web app, that will run as a Windows app. And all the code is identical. Okay. So that is the last slide. Okay. So now we have got a lot of time for Q&A. All right. If you want me to go back and to look at any previous slide, I can do that too. Okay. So I really value your questions right now. It is your time now. All right. We've already seen the introduction to Flutter. To recap, you need to install Flutter first. After that, you need to install the editor. Then you can use the content on the Flutter website to actually learn about Flutter. There's a lot of free content out there. There's a lot of YouTube tutorials as well, if you were to search for those. You can also get some books on the subject. Google has partnered recently with raywenderlich.com in order to produce some great learning materials for Flutter. We've also been given an introduction to the Dart language, which all you need is Dartpad, okay, in order to look through that. You've also seen how widgets are used to do the user interface. And finally, we have seen me build from start to finish a BMI application, okay? And you can see here, you can use this to do a whole bunch of other types of applications. Let's say, for instance, a currency converter application. It's almost identical, all right? So right now is the time for you to ask your questions, all right? We've still got quite a bit of time left, all right? So please do type your questions into the chat box right now. Okay, so the question that is being asked, does it mean for UI, UX development for Flutter, I can only choose one, either Android or iOS, or can do both? Okay, so again, this is a bit nuanced, all right? Because right now you can see, all right, when you use the material library, you will get an app that looks like this. It's perfect for an Android app. This code I can put into Flutter. I can ask Flutter to generate an AAB file. and generate an APK file, and it looks exactly like this, which is using material design, which is great for Android apps. Okay, but if you were to take this code and put it into Xcode and then use it to generate an iOS app, you are left with an iOS app which has material design. Now, that really depends on you. Is this something that you want? Because iOS customers, they prefer iOS look and feel. Now, if you look inside some of the code labs, they will actually have got some code which basically identifies what kind of device is the app running on, and then it switches the user interface to use the correct visual design for the app that you're running on. So you can actually do that in code. Or if you're just starting out and your app is like super simple, you can just use material app design. It's not to say that it won't run on iOS. It runs perfectly fine in iOS, but it doesn't have iOS look and feel. So again, that is up to you. Okay, you can take as much time, make it as nice as you want, or you just make it as simple as you want. But what I can say right now is that the code that you're looking right now on the screen, this BMI app, if I press generate, this is what it looks like on Android. If I press generate, this is what it looks like on iOS. And this is what it looks like on the web. It's the same each time. Okay? Hopefully that is answered the question. Okay, the second question is, may I know what is the best way to manage state on a complicated app? And this is, again, something which is a tricky question to answer because I don't know what your app is like. But generally, if you look at the materials which are available online, one of the very popular methods is using the provider package. You can Google that. So when you're using the provider package, state is kept at a high level, and any objects which require to have access to state, you can actually refer to the high-level object to know the state. This actually is available in Flutter right now. If you look at Flutter themes, for instance, you can see that the theme properties can actually flow down to all the objects. So I suggest that you look it in line for Flutter, and then you search for the provider package and look for some tutorials on the provider package. Another popular method is using block, B-L-O-C. But there are many different ways for you to manage state on Flutter. If you were to look, there's actually one book which is by Pack Publishing that is actually doing nothing but just showing you how to use state, different ways to manage state on Flutter. I will look for the link and I will paste it into the chat box shortly if I can find it. So that might be useful to you. Okay, how to publish to a mobile device? Okay, so to publish to a mobile device, it depends on what you have. Let's say, for instance, you have an Android device. So your computer must have Android Studio installed. After your computer must have Android Studio installed, then you connect your Android device to your computer and make sure your Android device is set to developer mode. Then when you look inside Flutter Doctor, it will basically show you one device available. And then when you click the build button in Flutter, it will then make the app run on your physical Android device. Okay, and then after that, if you want to put it up onto the Google Play Store, all right, all you need to do is you create the AAB file or the APK file, and then after that, you can put the AAB file or APK file onto the App Store. All right. Okay, now the next thing is iOS. It's almost identical. But for iOS, you need to have Xcode installed. If you have Xcode installed, all right, then you can produce the IPA binary. And the IPA binary will then be uploaded to the App Store. Okay, so that is how you publish. Also to mention, if you have an actual iOS physical device plugged into your Mac, and Xcode can already run on that device, then when you run in Flutter, it will also run on the device, no problem. Now, the question here is interesting. What is the meaning of this exclamation mark? If you look back, when I'm declaring double for BMI, you see there's a question mark there. All right. Now, this is in iOS, we call this kind of thing an optional variable. It's either can have a value or not have a value. In Flutter, they call it null. In Dart, they call it null safety. So the idea with the exclamation mark is basically to force unwrap, basically to get a value from an optional variable. Okay, we are going to force unwrap it. It's not the ideal way of doing it. You might want to do some kind of checking to see whether BMI has a value. But at this point, you're fairly certain that BMI has a value because you've already done checks earlier to make sure that the height and the weight actually have values. So it is not possible for BMI not to have a value. Okay, now the next question is for Dartpad, I assume we focus on features that do not need a phone sensors. Now, if Dartpad, you want to create a simple app, it's fine. It will not be able to make use of a hardware device features. And also, if you need to import anything, you want to import custom pictures, you want to import custom fonts, you want to import frameworks, actually even to publish app to App Store or Play Store, then you can't use Dartpad for that. Dartpad is strictly for you to be learning the language and to get to grips with how to build user interfaces in Flutter. Okay? But if you need to do anything more sophisticated than that, like you mentioned, you want to use the camera, you want to use the geolocation facilities, you want to use mapping. For that, you will either need simulator or device. Okay? That you really need. Okay? If there's any recommendation on backend that integrates well with Flutter, okay, there are a couple of things that I can talk about here. One of the things is obviously Firebase. There's a huge tutorial like how to integrate Flutter with Firebase that you can follow step by step. And Firebase for low volumes is actually free. The other one that I've seen, but myself I have not personally tried, is Laravel. So you can take a look at Laravel as well. Okay, so all this you'll be able to find online. For the Firebase one, let me see if I can find the link to that because that's really a very good tutorial. Normally that would be in the code labs. Can I use iPad Pro M1 instead of iMac for programming? You're going to have issue with that because you need Android Studio, you need Xcode, and you can't use Swift Playgrounds. Yes, you can use Swift Playgrounds to build an app for the App Store, but Swift Playgrounds, as far as I know, does not integrate with the Flutter framework. So not at the present time. I wouldn't be surprised that some will find a way to make it work. But at the moment, if you are using iPad Pro, you're just stuck with Dartpad for now. In fact, that was an interesting thing because during one of the classes that I did, some of the participants, they don't even have computers, but they do have mobile phones with really big screens. And I found out that even iPhone or like a sufficiently powerful Samsung phone with a big enough screen, that actually runs Dartpad just fine. So you want to start out with that, you can actually do Dartpad programming on an iPhone screen and Dartpad programming on a Samsung phone screen. It actually works on that. So what is covered in the training is we are going to look at the Dart language initially, because the Dart language is the foundation for all Flutter apps. There are a lot of things that I didn't cover. For instance, I didn't cover how to do subclasses. I didn't cover abstract classes. I didn't cover mix-ins and so on. There's also a bunch of features there. And then after that, we're also going to look at animation. You've seen how to do layout using widgets, but you haven't seen animation. So we're going to talk about animation. Then after that, we are going to build some simple apps. Like first app is to basically display your user information in the app, and then a light switch app. We're also going to look at how to display a scrolling list, procedurally generated list. All right. And then we're also going to look at how to build a very simple e-commerce like app that's going to show you a list of products on the screen. In the meantime, we're also going to look at some recipes, like, for instance, how to download information from the internet, how to process network communications. Then at the very last day, we are going to look at Firebase, which is basically the real-time database for the Flutter. And then we're also going to look at how to upload your app to the Android Play Store, and then how to the Google Play Store, and how to upload the app to the iOS App Store. So that is a very rough idea of what is being covered in this course. All the course materials will be provided to you. All the course materials will be official Google materials as far as I can make them, because Google is very good at updating all the course materials. And we want to make sure that you're all going to keep updated as much as possible, because I can tell you that the pace of development of Flutter is very, very rapid. They move from initially just iOS, then iOS and Android, then iOS, Android web, and with the very recent update, also iOS, Android, Mac app, and Windows app as well. Super, super famous, super, super fast.